That's good.
I want to hear you guys
Mm-hmm.
only. I am. Yes.
Am I in the camera shot?
You're good. You're way outside of it.
All right, we're both on 2020.
Good morning, everybody. How are you?
Great, we're on.
Good. Appreciate you coming. This will be going in a few minutes, and it's going to be live on our nh1.com website, and it'll also be on WBIN TV. Corey, I can hear you. Yes, I can.
Hey, Paul.
10-second delay, so you won't hear me for a while. Yes.
Don't forget we're adding the Rutland Center as well.
Right. Yes. No, I see that.
Okay.
I've got your sheet. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now I can. Yeah, can you talk to me, Jerry?
I just hear you.
Okay. Perfect. All right. Yeah, we're good. Yeah. Sounds good to me. All right, bye.
Mr. O'Connor, this is a circumstance where you're envisioning dozens of people in traffic.
Yeah, not a problem.
Yeah, mic check from the two of you guys?
What's that?
Mic check from both of you guys?
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How does that sound?
That sounds good.
Sean?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Clapping should be
All right.
Should be good.
Corey, Ben, when are we going? We're 20 past now, right? Okay. Just the animation and then me, right?
Stand by, guys.
Okay. Welcome to the Fiscal Fridays Festival. I'm NH1 News Political Director Paul Steinhauser. We're doing this in conjunction and in coordination with the Concord Coalition, Fix the Debt, and the Warren B. Rudman Center. And that's where we are today, the Warren B. Rudman Center, which is part of the New Hampshire School of Law, the New Hampshire School of Law. We are in downtown Concord. And today we're going to be talking to a couple of the congressional candidates in our races this year. And most importantly, we're going to be asking them questions that are important to you about fiscal and economic matters. And as you can see right now, I am joined by Shawn O'Connor, independent candidate in the 1st Congressional District. Shawn, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Paul.
Here's a staggering number. By 2026, the federal deficit is projected to exceed $1.3 trillion. And that debt is projected to reach 86% of the economy, of the GDP. That's the highest level since 1947. With that in mind, where does addressing the debt and deficit, where does it fit with your priorities if you're elected to Congress?
Absolutely. So, as the youngest candidate in this race, the debt and the deficit are of top priority to me because it's going to affect my generation and my children's and grandchildren's generations. And I have real concrete plans about how we're going to address the deficit. Right now, $2.1 trillion of American profits are being held overseas because of our high corporate tax rate. We have a corporate tax rate of 39.1%. That is the 3rd highest in the world after Chad and the United Arab Emirates. And see, the Republicans and Democrats just can't get this done. The Democrats, and my opponent, Carol Shea Porter, want to either not cut the corporate tax at all or cut it to 28%. Donald Trump and Frank Ginta and the Republicans want to cut it to 15%. This is ridiculous. Everybody wants to cut the corporate tax rate, but nobody can get it done. So what I have proposed is let's cut the corporate tax rate to 22.6%, which would put us right in the mean 50 percentile of all countries in the world. And then let's require American companies to repatriate those $2.1 trillion at 20% tax rate. That would generate almost $500 billion, which is equal to approximately the deficit for this year. So that's one step that we can take to address this really enormous problem that I'm deeply concerned about.
Let's say it's January of 2017 and you're now a newly independent member of Congress down in Washington, D.C. You look at the federal budget, you look how large it is. Are there areas that can be cut? Are there specific programs, specific departments, agencies that could be either eliminated or maybe at least trimmed?
Yeah, so Frank Ginta wants to cut the Department of Education. He wants to cut the Department of Energy. I don't think that that makes sense. I think that we can certainly find efficiencies in government, but if we really want to address the national debt and the national deficit, what we need to do is address Social Security and particularly Medicare. And so I have a plan that will make Social Security solvent for the rest of our lifetimes and those of our children and grandchildren. Right now, if you combine Social Security disability income and Social Security for retirees, the general reserves are paying $68 billion to keep those programs solvent. The idea of the Social Security Trust Fund is really a fiction because it's just a bunch of IOUs from the government because the government has borrowed against that trust fund over and over and over again. What I would propose is that we incrementally, beginning in 2018, very slowly increase the minimum wage while protecting 96% of New Hampshire small businesses through a small business tax credit that will hit the bottom line of their taxes for 50% of the increase each year. What this will do is it will generate $290 billion in additional FICA taxes without changing any rates or lifting any caps or cutting retirees or raising the retirement age. And that means that we would have a surplus next year of $222 billion. I would then require that that money be held separate and cannot be borrowed against by the federal government for other needs. What we will then do is build a stockpile up. And really, this is a temporary problem with Social Security because the millennials last year passed baby boomers as the largest generation in the country. And so as they get better jobs, they are going to be able to support Social Security because there will be more of them than there will be retirees. But we can raise almost 50% or a little over 50% of the population out of poverty and at the same time secure Social Security and protect small businesses. So that is my plan for addressing the national debt. In terms of Medicare, there are so many things that we can do to save money there. So first, we need to negotiate drug prices. It's absolutely absurd that Medicaid, the VA, and every private insurer can negotiate the price of prescription drugs. But because of a deal done by George Bush in 2006, Part D of Medicare, the prescription part of Medicare, does not allow for the negotiation of drug prices, even though Medicare buys $111 billion in prescription drugs and is by far the largest purchaser. Now, I have a lot of business experience. I started a company, grew it into a multi-million-dollar corporation. I have an MBA from Harvard. I have signed the front and backs of checks. So when it comes to business affairs and balancing the budget, I think that I have a record of achievement that is tantamount to either of the other candidates in this race. And so what we need to do is we need to negotiate these drug prices. Even if we got a 20% decrease, which I think is very conservative, that would save us $22 billion a year in Medicare. I also want to allow a public choice option, not a public option, not requiring people to go on Medicare. But if people don't like what they're seeing on the exchanges right now, they should have the option to buy into Medicare. That will provide another $20 billion to help us shore up Medicare and reduce the amount that we have to contribute from the deficit to Medicare, because people will get better care and they'll be able to buy into Medicare. And young people, quite frankly, don't use a lot of health services compared to our elderly. And so this will be great for both young people who will have better insurance, but also for retirees who will know that Medicare is stable going into the future.
I want to hit on all these topics and more. I want to go back to Social Security for a minute, though, because two things that have come up a lot from a bunch of candidates running first in presidential primaries when we had these Fiscal Fridays and now in our state races. And that is, when it comes to Social Security, raising the age and means testing.
Yep.
What do you think of both of those?
I oppose both means testing and raising the age. I don't think it's necessary. I think that my plan will ensure the long-term viability of Social Security. People have been given a solemn promise by their government that they will have these benefits that they have paid for, and I want to make sure that everybody receives those benefits. And I think, in the hyper-partisan environment, which is why I'm running for Congress, on the one hand, you have Frank Ginza, who's saying that we need to privatize Social Security, and Carol Shea Porter, who just wants to raise taxes constantly in order to pay for things. I've come up with a common sense plan that will work for everyone, will work for small businesses, it'll work for workers, and it'll work for retirees, and we won't need to means test, we won't need to raise the tax cap, we won't need to do any of these draconian measures that the hyper-partisans are trying to talk us into doing.
And I'm thinking that for our audience here at the Rudman Center and for our viewers watching right now, if they want to see that plan, they can probably go to your website?
Yep, so my website is Shawn, S-H-A-W-N, F-O-R-N-H. You'll find there my positions on every single issue. You'll find my Social Security plan, my Medicare plan, my very conservative and sensible plan to raise the minimum wage. If the minimum wage had just kept up with inflation since 1968, it would be $11.57 today. It's at $7.25. I'm not proposing any increase until 2018, at which point it will be, over $12. If we adjust it for inflation, I'm only suggesting $8.75 in 2018, plus the 50% tax credit for businesses.
And that would be an incremental step, or is that right away, at 2018 goes right up?
2018 it would go up from $7.25 to $8.75, but then half of the increase for any small business employer, and this would cover 96% of businesses in New Hampshire, would receive a tax credit. They already can deduct the full amount, but they would get a tax credit to their bottom line tax bill from the federal government for 75 cents for every hour of work done by a minimum wage worker.
We are going to ping pong through a lot of issues here, and we'll probably get back to minimum wage, but I want to get back to healthcare. It is, when you look at the federal budget, healthcare it's such a large part of the budget. Obamacare, there is so much talk about Obamacare. Democrats say it's working, though there needs to be fixed. There needs to be places where it needs to be improved. Republicans want to scrap it and put something new in there. You're in Congress, let's say it's January of next year. What do? What needs fixing? What about the regional exchanges? And would you allow them to cross state lines?
Yep, absolutely. So, again, here we get into this hyper-partisanship in Washington that is really why I'm running. We are a middle-of-the-road district, and we have been represented for the last 2 years by extremists on both sides. So, Frank Ginza wants to privatize Medicare and turn it into a voucher program. I would never allow that. That is going to have disastrous consequences for our seniors. At the same time, we can't just raise taxes and think that there's not going to be any impact, which is what Carol Shea Porter would propose. She just supports Obamacare and is proud to say she voted for it. I have an actual plan to fix Obamacare, and it consists of two parts. One of them you already mentioned, which is regional exchanges. So I buy my insurance on the exchange. And I can tell you that the programs that are available, the policies that are available are inadequate. They're too expensive and they don't have the right level of coverage. So I would support a regional New England exchange, and I have been proposing this for over a year now, where all 6 states in New England would come together and we would allow further competition. Because the problem New Hampshire faces is with a population of just 1.4 million people, we don't have enough people in the exchange to attract a lot of different insurers because they need a large enough risk pool that if there's a catastrophic event, they can cover that. When you then expand it to all of New England, you're now talking about, about 100 million people, and so we will be able to attract a lot more. Like Harvard Pilgrim doesn't participate in New Hampshire, but they participate in Massachusetts, so then they would participate in our New Hampshire exchange as well, or in the regional exchange. But I'm not just about regional exchanges. That will increase competition. That will, increase quality of care and lower costs. But at the same time, what we need to do is offer a public choice, not a public option, a public choice that allows people to buy into Medicare. I look at my mom, she's had cancer 3 times. She's on Medicare, and she's been very fortunate because she's allowed to cross state lines to visit any provider that she wants. I've had the same provider that I had from the time that I was in law school and business school at Harvard, and I couldn't see that provider anymore once I went on the exchange because he happened to be right across the border in Massachusetts, and they said your coverage is only applicable in New Hampshire. That's not something that anybody wants. We are a mobile state. People from the Upper Valley go to Vermont. People in the lower tier of the state might want to go to a doctor in Massachusetts, and we need to make sure to facilitate that. We need to give people more freedom to see the doctors and visit the hospitals that they choose.
Question for you. Would simply expanding Medicare, would it create less expensive health care, or would it reduce health care costs? Both? Neither?
So I think that allowing people to buy into Medicare, not just expanding it as a giveaway, but letting people buy into Medicare. Medicare is one of the most successful programs. It has a 3% administrative cost versus 7% in private insurance. And private insurance is allowed to collect a 20% profit margin, which obviously Medicare does not. So it will offer better coverage at a lower cost than some of the private insurance plans that are available today.
Medicaid, what would you do?
Well, I support Medicaid expansion because I think that, and I support this for a fiscally conservative reason, which is that, it is in everyone's interest to have people have health insurance. Because when someone doesn't have health insurance and their only outlet is to go to the emergency room where they know that they are legally required to get care, we all pay for that through higher insurance premiums. So the more people that we can get who can't afford insurance, that we can get onto any sort of health insurance program, that's going to save us all money, because certainly the hospitals and insurance companies aren't eating those costs, they're passing them down to the consumers.
Let's ping pong back to something we talked about briefly at the beginning, and that is the federal government itself, the large federal budget. Are there specific agencies that you'd like to see trimmed or maybe totally eliminated?
Yeah, I don't think that we need to eliminate agencies. What I think we need to do is have a federal audit and go through each of these agencies and see where there are repetitive costs, wasteful costs. I certainly see, right now we use tons of federal contractors. If you look during the recession, the area of the country that had the highest income growth and the highest real estate property growth were the suburbs of Washington. And that's because there are all these federal contractors making $200,000 a year. That's insane, and we need to trim that back. But that stretches across all departments. So I don't think it's about cutting this department or that department, but having a full audit, as you would in business, as I had every year, have a full audit, and then you find out where the waste is and where the repetition is, and that's where we cut.
Defense spending, what would you like to see there? A lot of people are proposing increased defense spending. We've heard a lot of the candidates talk about a larger Navy. We've talked about the war against ISIS, more efforts going to that. Where does the money come from, and what would you do?
Yeah, so my number one priority, and I think everybody's number one priority in Congress, should be to keep America safe. That is our solemn duty under the Constitution, and I'm never going to vote for anything that is going to put America in danger. At the same time, I think that we first want to work through diplomacy. That's been successful in the past. We've had 2 wars that, where we basically destroyed and then had to rebuild other countries instead of rebuilding America. And I think that those were mistakes. I think that in terms of defense spending, what I want to make sure is that we're working smart and that we're not just spending more money in order to, sort of beat our chests and say, look at how strong we are. So what I would want to do is to do, again, an audit to understand where are the needs and can we shift some of the costs? Are we investing in some programs for some possible new military equipment that may not be working or that may not be necessary in sort of this new paradigm where we are combating terrorism rather than an enemy like the Soviet Union. So what I think that we need to do is shift costs to our key priorities: special forces, intelligence. We need to engage with the Muslim community here in the U.S. that are our strongest allies in the war against ISIS. But I'm always going to vote to protect Americans first.
I want to get to tax reform in a second, but first I want to ask you, as an independent, if you made it all the way to Congress, if you won the election in November and made it to Congress, would you align with one party or the other? Where do you see yourself in Congress in January if you're there?
Yeah, so I am really proud to have broad support from Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike. In fact, just yesterday, Brendan Kelly, another independent in this race, dropped out of the race and endorsed me. And certainly his positions are significantly further to the right of my own, significantly further.
That's fair to say.
Yes, but he understands that I can win this election, that I'm the only viable independent that we can send to Washington, and he doesn't want to skim a vote away from that. And he believes that, number one, the fact that I don't take any PAC money, any super PAC money, any party money means that I can truly be independent because I won't be beholden to anyone in Washington. And he agrees with the idea of putting service back into public service. I'm only going to accept $15,000 as my salary and donate the other $160,000 to New Hampshire charities chosen by the people. So, if I get to Washington, I'm going to have support from across the board. I am not going to align with any party. The rules of the House require me to caucus with a party, but all that means is that for procedural things like committee assignments,
which are important.
Which are important. And so what I'm going to do is I'm always going to put New Hampshire first. And so what I have said is, and I think it's an open question right now as to who's going to be in the majority in the House after this election. We're seeing that Hillary Clinton is demonstrating some strength that seems to be helping in down ballot races. So whether the Democrats control the House or the Republicans control the House, I will caucus with the majority. And when that majority changes, I will change who I caucus with, because I'm an independent. I'm here to put New Hampshire first, but by being in the majority, I can put New Hampshire first in the best possible way, right? Because I get an extra committee assignment, and because of, and I worked in the House for a Republican member for 4 years. When I worked in the House, I saw that if you're not in the majority, and we were in the majority and in the minority during my time there, you can't get a bill to the floor because everything has to go through the Rules Committee, which is controlled by the majority party. I want to get action for New Hampshire. I want to get results for New Hampshire, something that neither Frank Inser nor Carol Shea Porter have done. And I believe that the best way to do that is not to align with any party. If I wanted to align with a party, I'd be in a party. But I've been a Republican, I've been a Democrat, I'm fed up with the two-party system. And what I think makes sense for New Hampshire is for me to always align with the majority to give New Hampshire the most power possible.
Now, I asked that, of course, because you were earlier this year running as a Democrat.
Yeah, I was running as a Democrat, but the member of Congress that I worked for 4 years, who was a real mentor to me, was a moderate Republican. So I have worked on both sides of the aisle, and I think that I can really bring people together as an independent. I think that this year you see people really fed up with the two-party system and ready for an independent candidate. And it's completely logical. If Maine and Vermont and Connecticut can send an independent to the United States Senate, there's no reason that New Hampshire, where 40% of the people, a plurality of this district, are registered as no party affiliation, there's no reason that we can't send an independent to Congress.
I think one thing Democrats and Republicans will agree on is that tax reform has gotten nowhere over the last decade in Congress. Let's say you're there, it's January of next year. What are your ideas on tax reform? Let's start with personal taxes, and then we'll get to business taxes in a minute. How would you like to restructure the rates? Would you simplify them? What would the rates be?
Yep, so if you go to my website, shawn4nh.com, you can see my tax plan. And so what I would do is I would cut taxes for anybody making $37,450 down to zero federal tax. These are working Americans. They're struggling to make ends meet. They don't right now pay a ton in taxes, but it's a lot of money to them at 10 or 15%. We should reduce that to zero. Then anybody making $75,000 or less, would have a 0% tax rate on their first $37,450. So, if you compare my plan to the plans put forward by my two opponents, Frank Ginta wants to do tax giveaways for the very wealthy in America. I don't think that's right. He refuses to close the carried interest loophole. This is a huge giveaway to Wall Street billionaires, right? 2,000 Americans save $12 billion a year in taxes because they get to claim their personal income as capital gains at 15 or 20% rather than personal income tax at 39.1%. That's absurd. We've got to close that loophole. At the same time, Carol Shea Porter thinks that we should raise taxes on anybody making even a middle-class living, and she would raise taxes on couples who are just getting by as well. I won't do that, okay? I would support a tax on millionaires, people making over $1 million a year. I think that they should pay a minimum of 30%. This is an idea supported by most of the people in that bracket themselves, including Warren Buffett, because there's no reason that through the kind of shenanigans that we've seen from Donald Trump, that you should be able to pay 0 or 10% tax when you're making over $1 million. You should not be paying less percent. It's not a progressive tax if you're paying less percent as somebody making over $1 million a year. And this will generate another $162 billion in revenue to help us close the deficit and start to pay down the debt.
You touched on it earlier, but let's go back to business taxes for a second. One of the biggest arguments we hear is that U.S. companies won't come back, won't bring their employees back from overseas because the rates are too high here. What would the rates be?
Yeah, so as I said, right now we're at 39.1%, third highest in the world. That's ridiculous. That's not making America competitive. It's costing us jobs, and it's keeping money invested abroad. I think that what's so sad about Washington today is when both sides want to cut corporate taxes, for the most part. Some extreme liberals don't want to cut taxes, the corporate tax, but that's ridiculous. It makes no economic sense. We have President Obama at 28%, Trump and the House Republicans at 15%. I would split the difference to 22.6%, which would put us right in the middle of the world in terms of our corporate tax rate. It would make us much more competitive. Lots of jobs would come back. And I would say to American companies, if you want the benefits of being an American company and being registered here in the United States, you got to bring that $2.1 trillion back. We'd give a short holiday where they can bring it back at a 20% rate. We'd require them to bring it back if they want to stay registered American companies. And that measure alone pays off the deficit for 1 year. So it takes us to even for 1 year. So we just eliminate the deficit for 2018 just by repatriating those profits. And then obviously going forward, we're going to have a lot more corporate tax income coming in because people don't realize you keep the rate high, people avoid the taxes. If you make the rate reasonable and competitive in the world, then people will pay the tax. And so overall, this is going to help corporations to bring the money back to the US, which we want from a job perspective. But it's also going to ensure that we get more tax revenue, because right now they're paying no taxes on this. They're hiding it in Ireland and the Caymans and all of these other tax havens.
We only have a few moments left, so I want to get one more thing on the record from you, and that is a balanced budget amendment. There are a lot of proponents of this. I was sitting right here with Governor John Kasich of Ohio last fall. He's a leader in that movement. Where do you stand on it?
Yep, so I have signed the back and the front of checks, as I mentioned before, as a small business owner, and I had to balance our checkbook every single year. And I think that the government should have to get to a balanced budget. And I would support a balanced budget amendment. I think that I would never do that, and I think I've outlined some specific plans here. I'm never going to do that on the backs of working people whose taxes I'm going to cut. I would never do that on the back of seniors because I'm going to make sure that Medicare and Social Security are protected. But at the end of the day, I think this election is going to be about trust. Who do the voters trust to send to Washington to be their representative? And I believe that when you compare the three candidates, Carol Shea Porter has lied about taking PAC money for 10 years now, and we're exposing that. Frank Ginta's FEC scandals are well known. I am someone who built both a business and a nonprofit foundation that helped thousands and thousands of students across the entire economic spectrum attend college and higher education at a lower cost. So I have a proven record of honesty, of getting results, and of putting New Hampshire first as a nonprofit leader, and that's what I'm going to bring to Washington.
You have been watching the Fiscal Fridays Festival. It is co-sponsored by NH1 News on WBIN TV, the Concord Coalition, Fix the Debt, and the Warren B. Rudman Center at the University of New Hampshire School of Law. That's where we are, and we have been talking with Shawn O'Connor, the independent candidate in the 1st Congressional District. Shawn, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
It was great to be here.
Thank you very much. Have a good day. great day. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. I'm powering down for 2 minutes. I'll see you guys in a minute.